Well, hello, Underdog Leadership Podcast listeners. Jenny Mitchell here with another episode. Boy, season 3 has been a barn burner. I have had such great guests. And the reason I've had such great guests is because each of them are writing a chapter in the collaborative book that is being birthed in the fall by Chavender, all about lived experience stories by women leaders, women CEOs. And my guest today is somebody who I've known actually in a couple of different capacities for a couple of years. Carley Schelck is founder and CEO of Urban Element. She is somebody I'm proud to call a colleague and a friend. She is someone who I actually met probably the first time, Carley, was through Women's Business Network, right? A networking
Yeah,
organization. Is that right? That's probably,
absolutely. It
yeah.
is correct. Yes. Yeah.
Right on. So we've known each other in different capacities for a couple of years, and you're going to hear more about Carley's chapter and all that in just a second. But I'm curious, Carley. So tell me more about Jenny calls you up out of the blue, and she's got this idea, right? She's telling you there's this idea for a book. She has a vision. I'd love for you to bring our listeners to that moment. What went through your head? What did you think about?
Wow. Well, it really stopped me in my tracks to
Did
think.
it?
There was two words I remember, and it was not a concept I had heard before, and it was the intellectual legacy. Okay. So that was very intriguing for me.
Mm.
So those two words you mentioned, and I sat on that and thought, intellectual legacy. Wow, that's really powerful.
Mm.
As someone who operates their own business and who there's not a lot of time to just sit back and take stock, I think, of what's happened and the
Yeah.
milestones. And so I was really curious about your model, your intention, your vision,
Mm.
and you had a way to invite me into that. So you invited me into that, and I decided to give myself a gift,
Yeah.
right?
I
Yeah.
felt that way about that call. I remember you kind of going, me, a book, like who, a little
Mm-hmm.
bit of who am I? Like, you're not the only
Mm-hmm.
one, just to not put you on the spot. We all were like, do I have something to say, Carley? Did that cross your mind?
Absolutely. Also, I remember we talked about the fact that I don't really love being in the spotlight. Like, it's
Yeah.
hard for me. It's not hard for me to share and storytell and be vulnerable. I've learned that
Yeah.
we can talk a little bit more about that today, but
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
hard for me to feel as though I was somehow, um, I guess, being featured
Yeah.
or just sort of in that spotlight that I don't normally naturally
Yeah.
align with.
Yeah. The center of attention, being the center of
Yes,
attention, right? Are you
exactly.
okay? So you say yes. And for those of you listening, if this is your first episode you're listening to in season 3, I really encourage you to go back to episode 1, and it's called Beginning. And it really kind of frames out the season, the book, how we set out to do this together. But in a nutshell, these 12 women got together in Toronto to write their stories together. And the compilations, the chapters are a product of that work together, but it was very intentionally done in group settings through conversation, through listening, and through reflection. And you mentioned that reflection word. So with that context for our listeners, Carley, I've been asking this question because it's been fascinating, the answers. What did you think the story was about? And what did the story end up being about?
Well, I think similarly to the other writers and the other women involved, initially I reflected on things that had happened to me. This, when I reflect back on leadership and stories and pivotal moments and examples and challenges, those are all things that happened to me. But really, when I sat with the stories that had resonated or were coming up for me or highlighted for me, I went through a sort of metamorphosis of
Mm-hmm.
understanding that it was more about what I did in the moment, who I was, um, how I reacted, what I brought to the table, my feelings. So I had to dig a little deeper around
Mm.
those themes. So I realize now through this experience that while things happen to you, what's obviously more important is what you do with them, what you do with those experiences, how you feel, how, what you learn from, how you grow from that. So my story in the beginning was reciting moments that were, yes, pivotal or life-changing for me in particular, but really what ended up happening in the end, and also through our team sharing, it
Yeah.
was pointed out to me that the readers wanted to, or the listeners wanted to hear more about me as a person and how I felt in those moments and what I did.
Interesting. Interesting. You just like that was a great encapsulation of, I would say, the whole experience for many of the women. I think, and for maybe many of our listeners, right? We're used to reciting our accomplishments
Mm-hmm.
or the things we did, to use your language, but to describe what they meant to us, to describe how we learned from them and how we anchor ourselves differently. And your story, without giving too much away, really has this, and I know your business well, and we're getting to know each other better now, this waffling between these two roles in the business. And it was really interesting to, when I read your story, to watch you processing that experience. So curious whether writing this down, how that affected the clarity for you as a leader.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, I think my biggest learning lesson from this experience was from the very beginning. I was really, I'm a pretty precise person who looks for a beginning and end, or
Yeah.
sorry, a beginning, a middle, and an end,
Yeah.
right? And so I approached the chapter and my story with sort of that same strategy, right? I have
Yeah.
to start in the beginning and then tell the story, and then we got to wrap it up with a bow. And
Yeah.
it really wasn't like that. And that's part of
Mm.
a little bit of the inner work I did, and the
Yeah.
revelations in that. So I realized in that this place and time doesn't need to have a conclusion,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is iterative, and it's still being written, and it's continuing in that sense. Mm-hmm.
I love that. So your story, in a minute, I'm going to get you to sort of provide a quick high-level synopsis, and Carly's going to
Mm-hmm.
read like all the women. So each episode, there's a little bit of a reading. But it's funny. We've been titling. We're recording the podcast before the book comes out, so it's been interesting to be editing and processing while recording. And we've been bouncing back and forth on titles for your chapter, and I'll give you a sneak peek. So at first, yours is the only story that speaks really directly to the pandemic, and being a retailer and being a food service provider, you guys were certainly hit. And it was funny because at first I had it titled as pandemic, and what I came up with, the conclusion I came up with, Carly, I hope you like it because this is live and I
Mm-hmm.
can't take this back,
Mm-hmm.
is that is part of the story, but it's not actually the essence
Mm-hmm.
of the story. And the title we've come up with is something you said in the story, which was, now what, question mark.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of like, where do we go from now? So
Mm-hmm.
I hope you
Mm-hmm.
like the title. Do you like the title?
I do. I do
Okay,
like the
good.
title because, Jenny, it also speaks to what you just said was, well, the pandemic was something that happened
Right.
to me and to us.
Yeah.
It's more about what I did in the moment, right? So you have this external factor. This happens all the time in business, right? We are
Yeah.
built to just fend off these external
Yeah.
risks. This
Yeah.
risk was greater. This life event was greater than most up until this point.
Totally.
That's why it was sort of the most fresh experience that I could draw upon that really tested that element of the leadership that I
Yeah.
was in.
100%. Okay, situate us in the story, and let's hear your excerpt.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, we're going to jump right in. All right. So
Yeah.
I chose two paragraphs that hopefully gives the listeners a sense of my inner conflict and what I was working through at the time. The merging of these two entities, the manager and the visionary, can it exist? Perhaps. I'm still not sure. For me, the art of being a leader is knowing when to step in and knowing when to step back. The willingness to get on the ground is a necessary part of business survival. But what I am also learning is that it is not necessary to be just one or the other, the manager or the CEO. Different businesses need different approaches. My growth will continue as I adapt to living in both of these roles. I now see this fluidity as a unique aspect of our company and, quite frankly, as a differentiator for myself as a leader. Today, I choose leadership that upholds authenticity and vulnerability. Authenticity allows me the freedom to know I can choose where and when I show up. Vulnerability means I accept the fact that there can be a risk to this approach, and that if the line is blurred too much, there could be a tipping point. There are times when I think, could I be further along if I did things differently or acted more like a CEO? If I got stronger about boundaries, if I mastered time management, if I delegated more, perhaps. But I'm learning to embrace the fact that this kind of visionary leader our particular business needs is one who is both standing in the forest and well above it, big picture and small details.
I love that. Wow. As a second half of my life kind of gal, I love the grace you gave yourself in that paragraph. Do you hear the grace? The sort of
I
acceptance?
do. I do. I'm able to say that. Absolutely. It
Yeah.
was a lot of inner work to
Yeah.
come to that conclusion and accept that struggle,
Yeah.
could be, doesn't need to be a hardship, and that I'm giving myself permission to be the leader that I feel most innately, nothing that I've read about or has been told
Yeah.
to me, or you should do this, but really digging in and allowing that to rise up.
Yeah. And trusting that you'll know which way to show up, Carley. Like trusting that, you talk a lot about how much joy in your story, about how much joy you got from the visionary for the brand of Urban Element, and the casting a place for the business to go and bringing people along. But then you talk about your original leadership experiences when you were working as a number two for others, which was so ingrained in you to be on the ground, like event management, like cleaning forks. Oh my
Yes.
gosh, right?
Yes, absolutely. But
Yeah.
that was the reflection now is that was just a natural,
Yeah.
it was just part of who I was, and what I felt was not necessary, appropriate, and that sort of lead from beside.
Beside. Oh, that's a takeaway. Lead from beside. I think we should use that on the pull quotes captions for this episode.
Sure.
So you've spoke incredibly eloquently about these two pushes and pulls, but I also want you to talk to our listeners about the fear and doubt. So about the writing. So when fear and doubt got in the way, what did you turn to, or what did you do?
Two things. I definitely turn to some confidants and people who know me well, and not entirely just friends, but people
Yeah.
that would provide me with that perspective of, listen, I'm letting you in on this story. What do you hear? Like, what
Yeah.
resonates? So sharing was a big part
Yeah.
of that. But the second part of that is, I believe that I hit a little bit of a creative bump.
Yeah.
I was really stuck. And I realized there's one point of the story where it's kind of the turning point for me was I realized I had the answer of what to say next because I was providing a lived experience, and I realized I was actually living or sitting on literature I had in my possession of a time the year previous that I had expressed this push and pull to a coach I was working with. So I realized I have those words. So when I sort of fell short of finding the next thing to say or where to go from here, digging up that piece and reliving that lived experience to say, wow, like here's the living proof right here. Here's the example that I have that will help me through, right, the next.
Yeah.
So that was very helpful. So sharing and getting feedback. I'm a big proponent of feedback. And secondly, to understanding that, again, it's this like trusting yourself that you do have that knowledge and wisdom. So I was sitting on those words, and so I pulled those up, and that really for me changed a lot to continue the process of writing the chapter.
And for our listeners, you get to read that special reflection. It's in the book. It's in italics. It's a cornerstone, really, of your piece. Just out of curiosity, are you a typewriter person? Are you a longhand journal person? Like, where were those notes?
Oh, they were typed.
Typed,
So
were
it
they?
was in an email. It was in
Yeah,
an email.
yeah,
I do turn to pen and paper quite often
yeah,
when I'm feeling, I think, with more emotional connection. If I really need to process some thoughts, I find
yeah,
that very therapeutic, and
yeah,
it connects me a little bit more to my words when I'm writing. But in that moment,
yeah,
when I was explaining to somebody else and trying to collect my thoughts, yeah,
yeah.
that was a typed
Love it.
segment. Yeah.
So you just went back and Google searched it
Hmm.
on your.
Hmm.
I asked the question because I am exploring. I'm kind of between the Remarkable, which I have here. I have my computer, and I
Hmm.
have a cajillion journals, and
Mm.
I just can't take any more journals, Carley. Like and yet there are some things that are sacred that only go in the journal. So I'm kind of in four buckets.
Yes, I'm the same, Jenny, but the journals are incredible because they're time capsules.
Sure,
Like
sure,
those are really
yeah,
they're full of wisdom. So
yeah,
my suggestion to you is to go back to some of those
yeah,
and see um, where you were at again
yeah,
in, the years
yeah.
previous and the progress you've made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The evolution. Oh my goodness.
Hmm.
Because there is so much evolution and this sort of marking of the
Hmm.
moment. So tell me about, and you've spoken a little bit to it already, but was there a moment during the process that something clicked, that something went,
Mm.
oh, where the path kind of opened up?
I think it was that moment when
Yeah.
I dug in and found
Yeah.
my personal reflection that really helped me move on, and it really, justified, I suppose,
Yep.
or was the example I needed to say, yes, I'm on the right path, and that's what I felt. But
Yeah.
earlier on in the process, and I alluded to this at the beginning as well, that exercise where we shared our stories,
Yeah.
really true set the tone. The guidance and the feedback from listeners and a scriber really helped set that.
Yeah.
That was a pivotal point in identifying the right story, at least for
Mm-hmm.
me,
Mm-hmm.
and becoming for it to crystallize a little bit more. But certainly the beginning, and then when I was stuck, it was
Yeah.
digging in a little bit more to
Yeah.
find that. Hmm.
It's interesting because, like, you're not in event management. I mean, you're a culinary boutique food place, but there's a lot of event aspects,
Hmm.
which is probably the most linear business you could be in, Carley. Right?
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
like set up, da 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 da. Everything is on a Gantt chart or timelines or whatever, and then this invitation to do this reflection. That's one of the interesting, I think, not oxymorons, but contrasts. Your story has a lot of these contrasts and the reconciliation of these two conflicts. For our listeners, I just want to include the process that Carley was talking about. You can do for yourself as well, and I'll describe what we did because I think there's some value even with our girlfriends, with people that we respect,
Hmm.
taking the time to do this. So we were in a group of three. One person was invited to share their story in whatever language, words they wanted, free flowing, no judgment, no
Hmm.
calculation of what you say. One person was tasked with asking open ended questions and being curious and exploring. And the third person, this is the one, Carley, right, was tasked with
Hmm.
listening, only listening. And so when it was reflected back to the person, their story, to
Hmm.
me, and I had that as the same experience, that was where I was like, oh, so the piece you're actually, because we what's the word, undervalue
Hmm.
ourselves and our skills. And that was incredibly, oh, you heard it that way. It was very valuable for me. That was the aha. Yeah.
This exercise, I think, can be applied
Yeah.
to so many situations, especially in business.
Yeah.
And if you are struggling with decision making
Yeah.
or a situation, sometimes we make things, and on the opposite too, we make things bigger than they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And being able to express that and hear back what somebody else is hearing, or really what the true, maybe there's what you feel is, one way, somebody else interprets the other. And that's just such a unique thing of
Yeah.
human sharing, right? Because
Sure.
we all have different experiences in this together. But I would absolutely apply this
Yeah.
exercise to more situations in business. And I'm so glad I had the opportunity to have that firsthand.
I love that. I love that. I know you teach marketing at Algonquin College. I'm thinking about brand. I'm going there, Carley. Like, as we develop brands and as we develop marketing, hearing and truly listening to customers, the adjectives they use, the language they use, but also, to your point, like, not just the language, but the meaning they associate with it. I mean, isn't a brand an essence, right?
It is, absolutely. And quite often what happens is businesses or companies start out thinking what they are
Yeah.
themselves,
Yeah.
but really it's also taking stock of understanding how you're being perceived, right? So so understanding your customer or whatnot, and how they're interpreting your message. Is it clear, right?
Yeah.
What are you
Yeah.
saying? All those things. So yeah, we can apply it
Yeah.
definitely to that.
Oh, I love that stuff. I mean, I love marketing, but I also think that one of your strengths, and you've alluded to it, is the brand creation piece. And I look forward to hearing more in the future about how you build your intellectual legacy, because I think there's a lot for us to learn from, Carley.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm
Yeah.
learning every day, and that's part of the
Yeah.
process. And I think that's also the shareable knowledge as well, is that
Yeah.
someone who I might mentor or
Yeah.
speak to, if they're just starting out, but we're all at different levels, right? And we
Yeah.
can glean so much from each other. So we only know until we share,
Yeah.
and we can be a little bit vulnerable in the moment.
Yeah. And I was recording an earlier podcast today with Justine Hendricks, and she talked about humility and curiosity, and how, I think about the reverse mentorship experiences I've had with some of the young people in their 20s who show me how to do things like 12 times faster than I know.
Right.
I'm like, oh my God, how did you do that? Like, slow down.
Yes, right. I feel that way about tech. Yes.
I don't. Well, just go to my kids, right? And just ask my kids how to do it.
Yes.
Oh, I love this. Okay, so tell me about the collaborative aspect. I mean, your business is built on the concept of partnership and team, and that's really absolutely a differentiator. But the collaborative aspect of 12 Women, how did that play into the experience for you?
Well, I'm already bought into it, as you know, with
Yeah.
collectiveness and partnerships. It's a big part of our business mantra and vision. So having the community was big for me.
Yeah.
And even though we started out together and we had to go away individually, always having that support structure, understanding that even though we were all maybe experiencing our own opportunities and challenges within this writing experience, a lot of us had the similar questions and fears and doubts, and that we could share, and it felt comfortable. So what a cool process. I mean, when I tell people that I'm writing a book collaboratively with others, they are just, this is such a unique experience, and I can't wait to dig into all those stories. I know there's going to be so much wisdom in that, but a lot of similarity. And I know that it's obviously, tied to the pillars of research. But I know that within this could be diversity, but also very similar shared experiences. Yes. So what a unique process. For me, it really resonated because, again, a sense of community, and I gravitate towards that. So that was really special.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and one of the goals that we're working on is for each of the pillars. So there'd be the pillar and then the stories, the lived experience underneath. At the end of each pillar, there will be a series of prompt questions so that people can use this as a discussion starter. With your story, this push and pull between being a manager and a visionary, that I think could prompt some really great conversations in the workplace about when do you feel like you're at your best? What's frustrating? Do you struggle with different roles in your job? And how do you reconcile that? I mean, I'm excited about that impact, that sort of ripple effect, because to your point, none of these women came in and said, yay, we're going to write a story. Am I on the cover? That was not the goal, right? It was not about being in the spotlight. It was sharing and imparting knowledge, and collective wisdom.
But that in itself, it was a bit vulnerable in a sense. We didn't need to be necessarily on the cover, but just the reveal, right?
Yeah.
The emotional reveal and the emotional storytelling. I know just even in some of the sessions we had, I heard that a little bit of fear and doubt and what if, and I'm worried about this. But I mean, sharing those things too, just to know that, we're all in this together towards the common goal and the beauty of that, right?
Yeah.
In the end.
And the intention, right? The intention. Like I think if you go at something with a true and pure intention, if somebody interprets it differently, that's on them. But none of us wanted to be in a place where we were, we spent a lot of time talking about other people and making sure the people in our stories were, that we respected them and that we showed them in a light, but still told the truth, Carley. That came up a lot, eh?
It sure did. And it obviously was a common factor in a lot of these experiences where there was likely these, so traumatic events or life-changing events or standout moments where we did not feel good about the situation and what happened in that moment. But I think, again, it was done with grace. I think the reader will get exactly the picture of what's being told without it being super specific.
I love it. I can't wait. I can't wait for people to read this book. So just a little plug before we kind of do our little wrap up here. If you are curious about this book, please know that in the show notes, there's a place you can get on the VIP list, or if you're listening to this after the book has already launched, you can grab it. You can look on chavender.com. That's Chavender like lavender, but with a CH at the beginning. Question, Carley, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way? Is it LinkedIn, or how do they connect with you?
Both. It could be LinkedIn, Carley Schelck. It could be my email. So Carley, Carley, at theurbanelement.ca. And I'd be happy to hear from anyone.
Yeah. And Carley has lots and lots of knowledge. And I think, there's lots of more chapters for Urban Element. I'm excited to be a fly on the wall and celebrate with you as those iterations continue. So last question, final thought of the day. Biggest takeaway, final thoughts.
I pause and ponder this question, right? Well, final thoughts and biggest takeaway is I'm so glad I gave myself the gift of reflection. So thank you, Jenny, for offering me this. I'm really, it was such a unique process, and it was something I never thought that I would do. As an entrepreneur, I'm always assessing opportunities, and I'm a yes person for sure. And I'm so glad I said yes to this. So because it has helped me be at peace with where I'm at and work through some of that inner conflict and inner dialogue I've held to myself for quite some time. So I guess my biggest takeaway would be, don't ever be afraid to, seize the opportunities in front of you, and share and be vulnerable, because the payback is great and then some. At least that's been my experience here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, I mean, that's just the best place to end, don't you think, dear listeners? Carley, thanks for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for your genuineness on today's podcast, and keeping it real, keeping it real on the Underdog Leadership Podcast.
Absolutely, Jenny. Thank you for having me. Such a great conversation.
For sure. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye.